Red Dawn is a 1984 film directed by John Milius, as well as co-written by Milius and Kevin Reynolds. In an alternate 1980s, the Soviet Union and Cuba invade America. A group of teenagers flee the town and live in the woods as they prepare to become a resistance movement. In the end, the teenagers are victorious over the communists, and the United States military recaptures the rest of the country. It's a well-remembered but perhaps not well-regarded film that was very much of its time. It's also propaganda. It's necessary to define propaganda because it's a word, like art, that is so far-reaching that it becomes nebulous in definition. Propaganda in its broadest definition is the spreading of ideas, information, or rumor for the purpose of helping or injuring an institution, a cause, or a person. With this definition, we immediately run into a problem because this could cover everything from a political attack to advertising to completely truthful information that the creator hopes will further an important and/or personal goal. So for our purposes today, propaganda refers to the derogatory usage, that being misleading information through some form of media to covertly further a nation or a potentially dangerous worldview that is valued by a nation. This is the more everyday usage of the negative side of the word propaganda. With this in mind, I do not think it is controversial to call Red Dawn right-wing propaganda, even if one believes in the general message of the film. Not propaganda created by the state, but propaganda created by private citizens. Generally speaking, the difference between propaganda like a tweet with an abhorrent message and propaganda that is created by the state is simply size and scale. And because of this, state-endorsed and state-created propaganda is usually what people think of when they use that word. However, there is another entity, at least in the United States of America, that has incredible size and scale, the magnitude and the money to spread or reinforce a worldview, and that is the motion picture industry. I am not demonizing Hollywood. It's a tool that can be used for the benefit or detriment of society. The point is that Red Dawn had the reach to be propaganda on a larger scale than a political pamphlet. So what aspects of the film serve right-wing goals? Well, the opening text of the film says that NATO has been disbanded and that America must fight communism alone. This is a popular isolationist nationalist prediction. The idea that globalism, a united world based on common interest, will fail. After the invasion, the teenagers band together in the woods. Daryl, the student council president, is depicted as a weak-willed intellectual who eventually is put in a situation in which he must betray his friends. Jed, a jock, is depicted as both morally and factually correct in all things. The far right, both fascism and right-wing American politics, historically decries intellectualism in favor of what it perceives as traditional values and strong men like Jed. Red Dawn props up hyper-masculine traits that the far right believes correct. Multiple times in the film, men are admonished for showing emotion or crying. "Don't cry" is a common refrain in the film. "Turn it into something else," Jed demands, suggesting that emotions are only good for violent anger and revenge. "Avenge me" is one of the most famous lines from the film. The Soviet Union is portrayed in almost Orwellian terms, creating re-education camps for civilians. Other Americans who are unwilling to join the cause of communism are executed while singing "America the Beautiful," establishing their sacrifice as patriotic and the Soviet soldiers as monstrous. Red Dawn spouts nationalism as justification for any action, including unlawful execution at the hands of the Wolverines.
Because we live here.
Propaganda requires an antagonist, like in any story. These World War II-era American propaganda posters, for example, tell a complete story. The Nazis and other Axis powers are the villains and the Americans are the heroes. Conversely, the infamous 1935 Leni Riefenstahl film Triumph of the Will has even more time to portray the Nazi Party as the hero and what it would call degenerates as the villains, even though some of the more inflammatory politics of the party are intentionally absent in the film. People resist the idea that media informs their worldviews. They don't want Red Dawn to be right-wing propaganda so much that there are fan theories and bad subreddit posts about how the film might be a misunderstood left-wing satire about nationalism in the same way that Starship Troopers was mistakenly believed to be pro-fascism instead of anti-fascism, which is what it is, by some critics during its release. I'm very sorry, but in addition to the text of the film not supporting this fanciful interpretation, John Milius himself has been explicitly clear about his intentions in interviews over the years, not to mention his highly public politics. John Milius was on the board of the NRA. He hated the peace movement and once claimed he was blacklisted in Hollywood by the 90s for his conservative politics. In reality, he was just extremely difficult to work with and was known to point guns at studio executives. Anything that could be interpreted as anti-war in the film, perhaps written by the co-writer Kevin Reynolds, was taken out by Milius. One actor, Powers Booth, said that Milius removed the anti-war aspect of his character and other more humanizing qualities of other characters. Anyway, while authorial intention is not everything, one of the key reasons for why Red Dawn can be comfortably called propaganda instead of just misguided is because of its intentions. Red Dawn, regardless of how one interprets it or misinterprets it, is violent right-wing propaganda because it was made with those politics and those intentions. Red Dawn is beloved among conservative audiences. The National Review, a conservative magazine that loves putting Ayn Rand on its cover, named it as one of the best conservative movies of all time. The real-world United States military operation to capture Saddam Hussein was named Operation Red Dawn. Its targets were given codenames Wolverine 1 and Wolverine 2. Milius was apparently thrilled about this. The film's lasting impression was to inflame the nationalistic, militaristic qualities of Americans. Red Dawn is what it seems to be. There's a saying, when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. It is critically important to be suspicious of any message contained within propaganda, even if, on the whole, you might lean towards its worldview. For example, if one is a right-leaning American Republican, they should still find it in their best interest to be suspicious of Red Dawn because its messaging is manipulative enough that it allows for someone who, in broad strokes, could agree with its patriotic sentiment to accept new, radicalizing opinions. As an illustration, imagine someone who is intensely patriotic about America but has no established opinion on the war effort. Red Dawn and other propaganda takes that pre-existing patriotism and feeds new information to the viewer that suggests that patriots are also pro-war. This does not happen as consciously as one would think, and because of this, it is difficult to track, and subsequently, the effects of the propaganda are easy to dismiss by the purveyors of said propaganda, or the converted people for whom already share its inherent message and politics. The power of propaganda for some is that it can reinforce and build up pre-existing beliefs. Defenders of propaganda have multiple tactics. First, they use events that take place in the movie to justify other events that take place within the same movie. It usually goes like this. I mentioned that the Wolverines execute one of their own for treason, a legal right that they do not possess because they are not a legal entity, which makes it murder. Worse, it is child murder because Daryl is a high school student. It is framed as something that was difficult to do but needed to be done and justified. I say that this is a terrible political and moral message to deliver to an audience because it reinforces the rationalization of violence and worse, revenge. Someone defending this will say, of course they had to kill Daryl. He committed treason. But here's the thing. Daryl didn't commit treason because Daryl does not exist. We are not seeing people on the screen. We are seeing decisions made by filmmakers. The filmmakers decided he must commit treason so that the Wolverines can be seen in a positive light to the target audience of the film and to justify murder. This terrible scene did not happen because Daryl committed treason. It happened because the filmmakers wanted it to happen. I'm not heartbroken that Daryl was executed because Daryl does not exist. Rather, I'm concerned that the filmmakers decided to make it happen and to frame it in the film and for the audience as justified. This is a common bad argument when questioning the decisions of the film and other media, but it is especially important when dissecting media with a message so overt and so negative that it can be safely called propaganda. In the film, the first assault by the Soviets on American soil is a school, and their first victims are a friendly teacher and some children. This is not because the invaders are evil, because the invaders do not exist. It is because the filmmakers knew this would upset the audience and immediately cast the antagonists as the scum of the earth. Nothing happens in the narrative unless it is chosen by the creators for reasons of audience manipulation. Nothing exists in a fictional world except the idea that it represents. Second, defenders of Red Dawn or other questionable films could and do claim it's only a movie, in hopes of either sweeping the conversation under the rug so that the person objecting to it will cease, or in hopes of not having to think about it themselves and relieving themselves of any guilt or lingering questions about whether or not the existence of a film they like is worth the negative consequences. Nothing is just an anything, because nothing exists in a vacuum. Red Dawn was not gifted to us by a muse. It was born out of the dangerous politics of its time and the dangerous politics of its creator. As a side note, I have seen people question the politics of Red Dawn while still claiming the film is otherwise a quality motion picture, racked in conflict about whether or not something objectionable but entertaining qualifies as good art. That's an understandable internal conflict, but if I can just put on my critic hat here for a moment, this movie is not that good. John Milius at his best was a fine script doctor and co-writer when working in tandem with more talented people, but his directorial efforts are mostly forgotten, save for Conan the Barbarian and Red Dawn, the latter for all the wrong reasons. Red Dawn is worth targeting as a piece of propaganda as I am trying to do today, but it is not worth the moral conundrum of whether or not it is ethical to enjoy because it is not that enjoyable. Every shot is basic, which makes sense for someone more akin to writing and not being on the set, and the acting is poor, even by Swayzean standards. So relax. It's okay to abandon your love for a movie once you realize its intentions, and it's especially easy to stop caring about something that was never particularly good in the first place.
Boys! Avenge me! Avenge me!
Red Dawn is special in how overt and obvious it is as a piece of John Milius's political propaganda, but American films with nationalistic overtones and themes about obedience to the state are extremely common. Americans do not always see them that way because America as the hero is the default for an American film, and nationalism disguised as patriotism is the background radiation of the American action genre. The universality in Hollywood pictures of American heroes, and particularly the American military as the default, has an othering quality on people who are not American. Movies are not great at forcing us to do anything, but they do inform and shape our worldviews. It's something that happens to us on an unconscious level. To a non-American, it is plain to see, but for Americans, it is so normalized that we don't always notice it. I recently watched The Great Wall, a Chinese-American co-production. When the trailer was released, there was concern that it would be a white savior film, but considering it was co-produced by China, with the biggest audience being the Chinese people, that concern may have been flawed. In reality, it's a nationalistic Chinese film, in which the predominantly Chinese cast is portrayed as nearly superhuman in its defense of its country, and its enemies are literally dehumanized by being monsters instead of depicting, for example, the Mongols. Its Chinese distributor is China Film Group, which is a state-owned film studio. China has also created a state-owned nationalistic action series called Wolf Warrior that is taking the country by storm. It's so easy to see from the outside. Propaganda relies on the public being ignorant. The best thing we can do to limit its effects is recognize it for what it is. Hi everyone, if you like what I do, please click on the orange Patreon link below. That's how this show happens. It's also the only way to request an episode. Also, there are other benefits to pledging, so check it out. The information is on my Patreon page. I'll see you next week.